So, what do you think is the bigger threat to our world today? Is it a massive earthquake that shakes a whole country? Or is it something you can't even see? Today, we're going to unpack that exact question, digging into some fascinating geographical data that reveals a surprising link between our planet's changing climate and the shocks that can bring global tourism to its knees. All right, to really get this, we've got to look at the story in two parts. First, there's what we'll call the physical shift. That's what's actually physically happening to our planet. Then there's the human impact, which is all about how we and our global systems react when things get chaotic. So let's start with part A, the physical shift. We're going to look at the hard data, going all the way back to 1880. Think of it like we're taking the Earth's temperature over the last 150 years to see what its chart looks like. And what we find is, well, it's not a slow and steady warming. It's much more like a sudden, irregular fever. For 100 years, from 1880 all the way to 1980, temperatures were kind of just bouncing around a steady average. But then, after 1980, things pivoted hard. Between 1980 and 2000 alone, the temperature shot up by zero point 0.4 degrees Celsius. And get this, the 10 hottest years ever recorded between 1850 and 2010 all happened between 1998 and 2010. The key takeaway here isn't just that it's getting warmer, it's that the warming is speeding up in this really erratic way. Now, this heat doesn't play fair. It isn't spread out evenly across the globe like butter on toast. Not at all. It's concentrated, creating these intense hotspots. You can see it right here. Huge temperature spikes in Africa, parts of Asia, and especially up in the Arctic. And when you have this kind of uneven heating, it basically fuels extreme volatility in our weather systems. We're talking more frequent and more severe heat waves, floods, droughts, you name it. It creates this bizarre disparity effect, where one part of the world can be suffering from a record-breaking drought, while another is getting hit with historic floods. So this new, unstable planet is the backdrop. The question is, how do we humans deal with it? Okay, on to part B, the human consequence. With our planet becoming more volatile, what kind of crisis do you think actually causes the biggest disruption to our interconnected world? We're going to use the global tourism industry as a perfect case study to figure this out. Now, here's a pretty common assumption you hear all the time. When we think about what would completely shut down travel to a region, our minds usually jump to those big, dramatic natural disasters, right? Things like massive earthquakes or tsunamis. It just seems logical that physical destruction would be the biggest problem for tourism. Yeah, about that, the data tells a completely different and honestly, a much more counterintuitive story. We have to disagree with that idea because the biggest shocks to the system, they don't come from where you'd expect at all. Okay, to get why, let's compare the two different types of shocks we're dealing with. In one corner, you have disasters. Think of these as sharp, localized, and pretty much contained to one area. And in the other corner, you have infectious diseases, which are widespread, totally unpredictable, and can go on for a long, long time. Let's look at a real-world example. Take the absolutely devastating 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan. The impact on tourism was immense, of course, but it was geographically contained. The hit was sharp, but it was pretty much confined to Japan itself, with only some minor ripple effects in the region. Now, contrast that with an infectious disease. An outbreak like SARS, or of course, COVID-19, doesn't care about borders. It just spreads. It crosses countries, continents, triggering massive logistical shutdowns, travel bans, lockdowns, the whole shebang. It creates this kind of borderless freeze on a scale that a localized disaster just can't match. So it's pretty clear these two types of crises are playing by completely different rules. And to really see just how different they are, we can break it all down using a simple framework we'll call the disruption matrix. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. Look at the differences. A disaster's geographic scope is confined. A disease is transnational. It's everywhere. The recovery pattern for a disaster is somewhat predictable. For a disease, it's completely irregular, full of stops and starts. But here's the absolute biggest difference, the barrier to entry. For a disaster, the barrier is physical damage, broken roads, damaged airports. For a disease, the barrier is systemic. It's government-enforced travel bans that can literally shut down the entire world overnight. And all of that leads to two wildly different recovery paths. After a disaster, you often see a predictable V-shaped recovery. Things get rebuilt, confidence returns, and people come back. But a disease recovery, it's chaotic. It's a messy, unpredictable line of ups and downs as the threat evolves and borders keep opening and closing. Any kind of stable recovery becomes almost impossible.
So let's put it all together. What have we learned? We're living on a planet that's warming up in an irregular, uneven way, which in turn fuels more extreme weather events. But, and this is the key insight, the biggest systemic shocks to things like global tourism don't come from those physical disasters. They come from borderless biological threats that our modern interconnected world is uniquely vulnerable to.
And that leaves us with a huge question for the future. In a world that's getting more interconnected every day and a climate that's getting more volatile, the biggest threats are the ones that don't respect the lines we've drawn on our maps. So, how do we prepare for the next major shock that we can't see coming and that we won't be able to contain?